Most transfers in football are failures. According to research conducted by Dr. Ian Graham, Liverpool's former director of research, at least half of all signings fail. That can be for a variety of reasons. Some players fail to settle into new surroundings, either on or off the pitch, or sometimes both. Some simply turn out not to be up to the necessary standard required to succeed at their new clubs, and in some cases, there can be a raft of extenuating circumstances, ranging from injuries to work permits. A few days ago, I saw a tweet by Zach Lowy, chief editor of Behind the Lines, who described Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall as, quote, a strong contender for one of the most pointless signings of 2024. The justification for that claim is a simple one. Dewsbury-Hall was a star man for Leicester City as they won the championship title last season, and he would likely have been their talisman in the Premier League this season, but instead he joined Chelsea, where he never seemed likely to start games given their intense competition in midfield, while setting them back £30 million, and sure enough, that is exactly how things have so far turned out. Leicester miss him desperately, having only won 2 games so far this season. Chelsea fans could be forgiven for forgetting that they had even signed him. He has played just 43 minutes of Premier League football this season, and obviously, Dewsbury-Hall himself is sat twiddling his thumbs. In other words, a pointless transfer for everyone involved, which seemed pointless when it happened, and so it has proved. That tweet got me thinking about who are some of the most pointless signings of all time, and when I posed that question on Twitter, it got well over 1,000 quote tweets or replies, almost 7,000 likes, and was viewed over 5 million times. Pointless signings, it would seem, really capture the public's imagination, and I suspect that is because all of our clubs have made them, and in some cases, rather a lot of them. The threshold to feature in this 7, therefore, is extremely high. Some of the most popular suggestions that I received on Twitter, like Ben Davies to Liverpool or Mislav Orsic to Southampton, are nearly pointless enough to feature. Davis was sought after by Celtic, and Liverpool saw him as very cheap and low-risk depth at centre-back, with potential sell-on value. And though he never played for them, they did indeed sell him on for a profit. Meanwhile, Orsic turned out to be pretty pointless, signed for £8 million and barely kicking a ball at St Mary's, but he was excellent for Dinamo Zagreb before that, so the case for signing him at the time was, in my view at least, a reasonably compelling one. Likewise, Chelsea's long list of serial loanees, whether that be Michael Hector, Tomasz Kalas or Lucas Piazzon, who spend half of their careers contracted to the Blues but never play for them, might seem pointless, but the point of them is actually to generate revenue for Chelsea, which they can then spend on players who will play for them, and that loan farming strategy has worked very well for them over the years. Something like Artur Melo and Miralem Pjanic's quasi-swap deal between Barcelona and Juventus may have been pointless from a football perspective, but again, allegedly, the point of those deals and others like them was to circumvent FFP regulations, and even a transfer like Australian international Trent Sainsbury leaving Jiangsu Suning to join then-fellow Suning holding group-owned Inter Milan in 2017, despite Inter Milan never having any intention of making Sainsbury part of their plans, did have a point. It's just that the point was getting a foreign player off Jiangsu Suning's books because they had too many, as per Chinese Super League rules at the time. No, if a signing had even the vaguest flicker of a point, any more points to it than a circle, it isn't going to make this 7. Right, I will return to some other popular suggestions and explain their omissions at the end, along with some honourable mentions, but without further ado, who legitimately was a fairly pointless signing for the likes of Bahia and Jagadina, here are 7 of the most pointless signings in the entire history of football. 7th, Donny van de Beek to Manchester United. This might seem a little harsh. If you wanted to steelman Manchester United's signing of Donny van de Beek, you could point to his impressive form in a talented Ajax team, his output in terms of goals and assists, and the fact that he was a full Dutch international, aged only 23. No one is denying that Donny van de Beek is, or certainly was, a talented footballer, who under some circumstances could have been worth the £35 to £40 million that Manchester United paid for him and, who knows, could even have been a success at Old Trafford. We are dealing with the circumstances in which he was signed though, rather than a set of imagined ones, and in that context, It was utterly pointless. Firstly, Manchester United's best player at the time was Bruno Fernandes, signed just 6 months earlier from Sporting, immediately becoming their star man, and also aged only 25, so it's not like he would need replacing anytime soon. When the Red Devils signed Van der Beek, who played predominantly as a number 10 at Ajax, or at the very least, an offensive 8 the previous season, I assumed that they had a plan to find a new role for him and fit him into the same team as Fernandes. I know. Manchester United, post-2013, have a plan. What was I thinking? It turned out that they genuinely just hadn't considered how or where their new potential £40 million man would fit in, and to make matters worse still, they already had capable deputy number 10s on their books in Juan Mata and Andreas Pereira, the latter of whom is now a star man at Fulham and can actually play in a slightly deeper role, as well as having become a regular fixture for Brazil in 2024. Donny van der Beek, meanwhile, played a measly 513 minutes of Premier League football in his debut campaign at Old Trafford, and he went from hitting double figures in terms of both goals and assists in each of his last 2 seasons at Ajax, to scoring just 2 goals and 2 assists in all competitions over the course of 4 years contracted to Manchester United, departing in the summer of 2024 to join Girona for an initial €500,000. Van der Beek's departure contributed to the slow burn that was Ajax's decline. He added absolutely nothing at Manchester United, not even after the Red Devils literally appointed his old boss from Ajax, and from the perspective of Van der Beek's own career prospects, it has been ruinous, costing him his place in the national team, banishing him to a club with a sub-15,000 capacity stadium, and plunging his stock even deeper into the abyss than Boeing's during that time. 6th, Hatem Ben Arfa to PSG. Hatem Ben Arfa has always infuriated and enthralled in equal measure through his combination of almost peerless talents, flair and imagination, coupled with the petulance of a small child and the work ethic of Prince Andrew. That is a dreadful combination. Prince Andrew and a small child, that is. Ben Arfa's combination also made him exhilarating at his peak, earned him contracts with super clubs like Marseille and Hull City. Why are you laughing? But also prevented him from reaching the heights that he could have done if he wasn't a total arse. So talented at Lyon during his teenage years, Ben Arfa had TV cameras following around from the age of 14, and everyone at Clairefontaine, France's national talent centre, that nurtured the likes of Anelka, Henry and Mbappe, was convinced that he would go on to win the Ballon d'Or. That never quite happened for Ben Arfa, who fell out with Alan Pardew at Newcastle United, very easily done in fairness, but proceeded to fall out with virtually every other coach that he worked with, leading some to suspect that, just this once, it might not have been Pardew's fault. After his Newcastle prospects crumbled, combined with a loan move to Hull City that was cut short by Steve Bruce, with Ben Arfa having gone AWOL, the Frenchman's career was left in tatters. He still had enough credit in the bank in France to earn a short-term deal with Nice in January 2015, after his Newcastle contract had been terminated, but even that would soon collapse. Because Ben Arfa had already played for Newcastle United reserves and Hull City in official competitions during the 2014-15 season, he was prevented by FIFA from representing another club. As such, Nice cancelled Ben Arfa's contract before re-signing him in June. Despite having barely kicked a ball for 12 months, Ben Arfa exploded back into life on the French Riviera. Still aged only 28, he was undoubtedly among the best players in Ligue 1, arguably trailing only Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Angel Di Maria that season, as he scored 18 goals and made 7 assists, propelling a Nice team that had finished 11th the previous year, all the way up into 4th. Ben Arfa's form was so impressive that he earned a recall to France's national team ahead of Euro 2016. Unfortunately for Nice, Ben Arfa had only signed a 1-year deal, and having stood out a mile at the Allianz Riviera, he wasn't short of suitors. Out of them all, Ben Arfa chose to join Paris Saint-Germain, a sensationally stupid transfer that made 0 sense for everyone. Nice lost their star man, PSG already had the likes of Lucas Moura, Christopher Nkunku and Julian Draxler struggling for game time, and Ben Arfa shrunk, going from being a huge fish in a small pond at Nice to merely making up the numbers in Paris. From 17 goals in the league the previous season, Ben Arfa didn't score a single league and goal for PSG, restricted to just 626 minutes of mostly late cameo appearances in total. Not only that, PSG went from winning the league by an unprecedented 31 points the previous season to finishing second, 8 points behind Monaco, in Ben Arfa's debut campaign. A truly gargantuan single-season point swing. I'm not laying that solely at the door of signing Ben Arfa, to be clear. It just emphasises what a pointless signing it was, as had always appeared to be the case. Ben Arfa lost his place in the France squad, his stock plummeted yet again, he had a major fallout and was entirely frozen out during his second season, playing no football at all and not even training with the first team, and then he was released. Ben Arfa's career never really recovered. He was okay at Rennes, but looked finished at Valladolid, Bordeaux and Lille, and as if all of that wasn't quite bad enough, he ended up suing PSG for £7 million in damages, owing to how they froze him out. A simultaneously pointless and disastrous signing from start to finish. Fifth, Kim Källström to Arsenal. Hey, I never said no loan signings. There have possibly been more pointless loan signings than permanent ones over the years, with clubs thinking, what the hell, it's only a loan, and subsequently sanctioning some truly purposeless, pointless, and brain-dead acquisitions. Step forward, Kim Källström. Arsenal started the 2013-14 season like a house on fire, and from game week 5 in mid-September all the way through to game week 24 at the start of February, they led the Premier League table virtually without interruption. On the 10-year anniversary of the Invincibles, it looked as though Arsene Wenger might finally lift a first Premier League title at the Emirates, with the Gunners only losing 3 of their opening 24 games. In the last week of January, though, Aaron Ramsey, who had been Arsenal's and arguably the Premier League's best player during the first half of the season, suffered a thigh injury expected to keep him out for the next 6 weeks. Combined with a 3-match suspension for Matteo Flamini and recurring injuries to Jack Wilshere, the latter would go on to become a bit of a theme, Arsene Wenger was forced into the market for a midfielder. Arsenal weren't exactly renowned for breaking the bank during this time, but for a team chasing a Premier League title, you'd have thought that they might have shown some ambition. Wenger chased Julian Draxler all month, not literally, that would constitute stalking and harassment, only to miss out on deadline day. Meanwhile, inquiries for Southampton's Morgan Schneiderlin and PSG's Blaise Matuidi were both batted away. Where to next? Why, Kim Källström, of course, Sweden's finest. I jest, but Källström did actually win 131 caps for Sweden, which is more than Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and like everyone in this 7, with only 1, 2, 3, or possibly 4 exemptions at a push, he was a talented player. Unfortunately, Arsenal signed him when, 1, he was probably already a bit past his best, age 32 and contracted to Spartak Moscow in Russia, and 2, and I really cannot emphasise this point enough, given that he was brought in to add depth at a time of a midfield injury crisis, he was injured. Arsenal discovered that Källström had a back injury during his medical, sustained just 2 days earlier from a fall in training, but deep into transfer deadline day, it was either him or no one. So Arsenal signed Källström, effectively carrying out his rehabilitation for Spartak Moscow. Meanwhile, he wouldn't make his debut until March, by which stage Arsenal had already fallen to 3rd and Ramsey had returned. All told, Källström, or Källström as I believe it is properly pronounced in Swedish, played just 135 minutes of football in an Arsenal shirt, but pointless though his signing undoubtedly was, and Arsenal ultimately finished 4th before he returned to Russia, unlike with Hatem Ben Arfa, there would be a happy ending. In the FA Cup semi-final, Källström, a set-piece specialist, came on for 7 minutes and converted a penalty in the shootout where the Gunners beat Wigan 5-3 to reach the final. Arsenal went on to win that final, beating my club Hull City, the absolute scumbags, 3-2. Källström wasn't in the squad for the final, but he described his cameo appearance against Wigan as, and I quote, the greatest 15 minutes of my life. Alright, Arsenal still finished 4th, he didn't actually feature in the final, and signing someone with a broken back to fix your short-term midfield injury crisis might be one of the stupidest and most pointless things that a club has ever done, But at least Källström enjoyed himself. Hey, it's better than if he'd left and then sued them for £7 million in damages. That's all I'm saying. Fourth, Marcus Bent to Wolves. I told you that loan signings are often among the most pointless signings of all, and they don't come much more pointless than Marcus Bent's move to Wolverhampton Wanderers. Marcus Bent made a name for himself initially in the Premier League with Crystal Palace, and he returned there to great acclaim at the start of the 2000s with Ipswich Town. A real handful up front, Bent scored 9 goals, 10 in all competitions, despite the fact that Ipswich were relegated. He hit 9 in the Premier League and 10 in all competitions again at Leicester City, as they were also relegated, and then he signed for a more established top-flight club in the form of Everton. In Bent's debut campaign, Everton finished 4th, their highest league finish of the Premier League era, but his own output slightly decreased. The following season, he was often dropped in favour of James Beattie and James McFadden, and Bent's demons, sometimes attributed to a troubled upbringing, began to bubble up to the surface. Often described as a journeyman, Bent played for a lot of clubs, but early on at least, that was only down to his own success contrasted with the sporting and economic failures of the clubs that he played for. Nonetheless, post-Everton, both on and off the pitch, Bent's life fell apart. He joined Birmingham City in the Championship in 2008, where he scored just 3 goals in 35 games, followed by loan moves to Middlesbrough and Queen's Park Rangers, both also in the Championship, in which he failed to score a single goal. In theory, Bent ought to have struggled to have landed a Championship job at all, let alone had any prospects of a Premier League return by 2010. In reality, Wolverhampton Wanderers existed, and they were hell-bent on becoming the Premier League's weirdest club by this stage. So Wolves signed Bent, who had failed in his last 3 Championship stints, and, lo and behold, he also failed at Wolves in the Premier League. It was a turn of events that literally everyone saw coming. Wolves' car crash chief executive Jez Moxey stated upon Bent's arrival, quote, "He's also a different type of striker to what we have in that he's a physical presence. We needed someone after the departure of Andy Keogh, and Marcus can do a job for us." End quote. The job that Bent did, to be specific, was to watch Wolves lose from the bench, only play 95 minutes of football in 5 months, and fail to score a single goal or make an assist. Bent subsequently joined Sheffield United on loan in the second half of the season, where he failed to score a single goal again, as the Blades were relegated to League One. After leaving professional football, Bent's personal life has sadly been extremely turbulent. He was arrested in September 2015 following a serious mental health episode in which he attacked police with a knife at his home, for which he was given a suspended 12-month prison sentence after admitting to 1 charge of affray and possession of cocaine, and 4 months later, he was fined £385 with £85 of costs after being found with cocaine at Chessington World of Adventures. For those of you who don't know, Chessington World of Adventures is a theme park and a zoo, not routinely associated with the possession or consumption of cocaine, although, admittedly, that must be one hell of a high. That is not to be advised, of course, but equally, not pointless. Bent's move to Wolves, by contrast, was eminently pointless, and though one hopes that he is in a better place now, that transfer deservedly features in 4th. Third, Khalid Al-Rashidi to Nottingham Forest. When it comes to pointless signings, few teams can top Nottingham Forest. That's partly just because, throughout the Fawaz Al-Hazawi and subsequently the Evangelos Marinakis ownership regimes, Forest have signed so many players. Following their most recent promotion to the Premier League, Forest signed a brand new first-team squad for almost €200 million, only one of whom actually started in their most recent game against Newcastle. That window was only 2 years ago. A special mention must go to Josh Bowler, maybe the most pointless signing that season, who was signed for a couple of £1 million from Blackpool, immediately went out on loan to fellow Marinakis Group club Olympiakos, and still hasn't played a single minute of football for Forest. Going back further though, you would do well to top Khalid Al-Rashidi when it comes to pointlessness, not just at Nottingham Forest, but in all of world football. A goalkeeper from Kuwait, the same nationality as Forest then owner Fawaz Al-Hazawi, although I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. Al-Rashidi joined Forest on trial in the summer of 2012, but he was refused a visa to move to the UK. Fawaz pushed ahead with the deal regardless, signing Al-Rashidi on a, brace yourselves here, 2.5-year deal in January 2013. This was a 25-year-old goalkeeper whose only experience outside of Kuwait, a country which is ranked outside of the top 100 of the FIFA World Rankings, consisted of 10 games for Tatran Prešov, a Slovakian team that you have never heard of, do not lie to me, with a 2,500 capacity stadium. Upon his arrival, having seen him in training during his trial, manager Alex McLeish confirmed that Al-Rashidi was likely to play second fiddle behind Forest number 1 Karl Darlow. McLeish added, quote, "It will be good to look at him in close quarters rather than watching him on video. We are hopeful that he will be available to go on the bench on Saturday. Then we could integrate him in training and see what he can do." End quote. That loosely translates from managerial jargon to plain English as, and I quote, "This bloke is absolutely useless, he's never going to play for us, and if Karl Darlow gets injured, we're going down." End quote. Al-Rashidi never played a minute of football for Forest, failing to become the first Kuwaiti to represent an English club, and 12 months into his 2.5-year deal, the plug was finally pulled on this pantomime of pointlessness, and Al-Rashidi returned to Kuwait, where he still plays now, aged 37. Second, Carlos Kaiser to Botafogo. Often referred to as the fake footballer, Carlos Enrico Raposo, or Carlos Kaiser as he became known, played for 11 different clubs over a 13-year professional career without ever playing a single game of football. Because the shortlist for this 7 was so strong, I wanted to try and stillman any ounce of reasoning behind a signing. I mean, I even left out Newcastle United signing Santiago Munoz on an 18-month loan seemingly just because he had a similar name to a fictional character who played for them in a movie because, hey, I suppose that is a reason. A terrible one, ranking pretty high on the pointless-o-meter, but a reason nonetheless. Likewise, at the start of Carlos Kaiser's career, the reason clubs signed him wasn't pointless, it was just ignorance. Kaiser befriended football legends like 1970 World Cup winner Carlos Alberto Torres, who recommended him to clubs, as well as journalists who would write fictional glowing accounts of his non-existent performances. Clubs, effectively then, were duped. And when Kaiser arrived, physically fit and plausibly a footballer in his appearance, he would feign hamstring injuries, dental problems and personal issues to prevent him from ever actually having to kick a ball in training or, God forbid, in a match, until inevitably those clubs gave up on him and he started the ruse all over again somewhere else. So, Puebla Independiente Bangor, in the pre-internet and information age, I can forgive you. Botafogo, on the other hand, I cannot. Botafogo were Kaiser's very first academy club as a 9-year-old, when he had actual aspirations of becoming a footballer who played games. Following his first professional stint in Mexico with Puebla, Botafogo signed Kaiser for a second time, handing him his first professional contract in Brazil. It's not that earns him an inclusion in this 7, though. In addition to his fake injuries, Kaiser had added a fake mobile telephone to his arsenal of con artistry by this stage, pretending to speak English to agents or clubs who were making him offers on a toy mobile telephone. The only problem, well, not the only problem I suppose, but one of the problems was that Kaiser couldn't actually speak English, and unfortunately for him, Botafogo had a club doctor who could, and was therefore able to expose his scam. After leaving Botafogo for a second time, Kaiser joined either 9 or 10 different clubs, depending upon whether you include one of them, during which time he had a fight with supporters as a substitute in order to get sent off right as Bangor were about to hand him his first ever appearance in football. He didn't even play a game for the El Paso Six Shooters, a dreadful American indoor soccer team who played 12, lost 12, and finished bottom of the league while Kaiser was there. And his mobile phone scam was discovered by another staff member who spoke English at Fluminense. After all of that, 18 years after he first left the club, and 10 years after the end of his second stint, which ended when they themselves discovered his mobile phone scam, Botafogo signed Kaiser for a third time. even in a relatively low information era compared to now, where it is plausible that a club could believe Carlos Kaiser's extraordinary unsubstantiated claims. After more than a decade of not kicking a ball, when you yourselves discovered him to be a con artist more than 10 years ago, how on earth do you end up signing someone again? Surprisingly, Kaiser actually turned out to be a really good signing for Botafogo third time around, bagging 18 league goals and 23 in all competitions in his debut campaign, as they won the Campeonato Carioca and reached the semi-finals of the Libertadores. No, not really, obviously. He pretended to be injured for another few months and didn't play a single minute before his contract was terminated. I mean, who could have seen that coming? Once is a mistake, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a deranged pattern of absurd pointlessness, as the old saying goes, or alternatively, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me 3 times, who the hell is in charge of Botafogo's recruitment? Seriously, to God, what is going on here? So Botafogo's third time signing Kaiser takes a deserved spot in second. First, Tal Ben Haim to Queen's Park Rangers. I'm not saying that Tal Ben Haim was a pointless signing by Queen's Park Rangers or anything, but he comes in narrowly ahead of a man who never played a game of football and was signed by the same team 3 times over 18 years, despite being a known fraud. I am saying that Tal Ben Haim was a pointless signing by Queen's Park Rangers, of course. I am quite literally putting him top of a list of the most pointless signings of all time, but I found that an amusing way to introduce him, and quite frankly, comedy is more important than reality. Whereas Carlos Kaiser impersonated a footballer by fraudulent means in order to obtain professional contracts, but never actually played, Tal Ben Haim adopted the much more brazen strategy of impersonating a footballer by legitimate means and actually daring to play in games. No one can doubt his chutzpah. I am exaggerating, of course. Ben Haim obviously had some talent. Chelsea gave him a 4-year deal in 2007, and he won 96 caps for Israel. I never really saw it. Ben Haim got his big break in the Premier League with Bolton, where he earned his move to Chelsea, a path that would be followed by fellow centre-back Gary Cahill some years later. It would be fair to say that Ben Haim was always very well connected though. He was represented by super agent Penny Zahavi, a fellow Israeli who played a huge role in almost all of his major transfers. Shortly after he joined Chelsea, Roman Abramovich, a close friend of Zahavi since the 1990s, who actually facilitated his takeover of Chelsea, sacked Jose Mourinho and replaced him with Avram Grant, another Israeli, who was also represented by Zahavi. Having been rubbish at Chelsea, Man City, and on loan at Sunderland, Ben Haim subsequently joined an already financially crippled Portsmouth on an enormous contract shortly before they entered into administration. Portsmouth were previously owned by the French-Israeli businessman and heir Sasha Gardemak, whose takeover had also been facilitated by Penny Zahavi, building a very close relationship between Zahavi and Portsmouth. Pompey, just like Chelsea had, proceeded to appoint Avram Grant and sign Tal Ben Haim. Meanwhile, Zahavi was actually put on the club's payroll, taking a salary of £400,000 a year as a scouting consultant. I hope they kept the receipts. When the proverbial hit the fan, Pompey were relegated and entered into administration. Ben Haim's £36,000 a week wages, an astronomical sum at the time, was financially crippling. Ben Haim, unsurprisingly, refused the club's offer to reduce his salary to £5,000 a week, a limit enforced on them by their administrators, instead joining West Ham United on loan, who covered a portion of his wages. West Ham signing Ben Haim, yet again managed by Avram Grant at the time, was fairly pointless, and in the 2011-12 season, still with 12 months left on his contract, Ben Haim played 33 times for a Portsmouth team that was relegated to League One. His contract was eventually paid up that summer, and Ben Haim departed. Following this series of disasters, and after 6 months without a club of any description, QPR were determined to prove that anything that Pompey could do, in terms of financially ruinous, brain-dead, and totally pointless signings, they could do too. I have made a whole video about QPR during this time, called How Not to Run a Premier League Football Club, which should give you some idea, at a time when they signed the likes of Jose Bosingua, Esteban Granero, and Jermaine Genius on astronomical contracts.
Securing the coin. Coin. Only certain man know what I'm talking about when it comes to securing the coin. You just feel like you've earned it. You feel like you deserve it. Come on then. Come on.
Who could forget Christopher Samba, who was signed for £12.5 million from Anzi Makachkala on a reported £100,000 a week wage, made 10 miserable and deeply forgettable performances as QPR were relegated, before immediately returning to Anzi Makachkala for £12 million. It doesn't get much more pointless than that. At least Samba had been a rock at the back, and very impressive in the Premier League quite recently for Blackburn Rovers, if you wanted to find some kind of logic behind it. Tal Ben Haim, by contrast, hadn't played consistently well for about 6 years, had just been relegated to League One as a regular starter at Portsmouth, and, well, look, can we just address the elephant in the room here? He wasn't very good at football, was he? Honestly, I'm not trying to be rude here, but did anyone, at least post-Bolton, ever see Tal Ben Haim play well? At least Carlos Kaiser had the good grace to pretend to have a dental emergency so that we didn't have to watch him play. Sure enough, Ben Haim only made 3 appearances for QPR, as the Rs finished bottom of the Premier League table under Harry Redknapp, losing more than £65 million that season in the process. What a fantastic job by everyone involved. 2 games before the season finished, Toronto FC announced that they had signed Ben Haim on loan, but that move collapsed due to complications regarding his wages. I can only assume that the complication was that he wanted some, and Toronto FC had watched him play. That is it for my 7, a pointless video if ever there was one. Honourable mentions go to Ricky Alvarez's move to Sunderland and Jean-Kevin Augustin's move to Leeds as 2 high-profile examples of clubs signing players that they didn't want, which seems pretty pointless, but they missed out because they did want them originally when they agreed to those terms in their loan deals, and the logic there was more coherent than any of the 7 that featured. Danny Drinkwater to Chelsea was pretty pointless, but I refuse to include it in virtually every transfer-related video that I make. Wellington Paulista to West Ham was fairly absent of any logic or purpose, as was Manucho to Man United, Shevchenko to Chelsea, Michael Owen to Stoke City, David Unsworth to Aston Villa, and Sven Combs, I bet he does, to Watford. There are about 1 million others that could have featured, and even more that couldn't for reasons that I could explain, but I fear that it wouldn't be very interesting. Hey, you can throw them out there down below in the comments and debate them at your will. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Armour, both of which should be about to appear in your, just the screen that you're looking at, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and most recently of all, Blue Sky, via the username at HITC Sevens on the first 3, and I don't know on the other one. Just search my name, I'm sure it'll come up. And those links, plus a whole lot more, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.